Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of YO2A Arsenal Roundup News. My name is Richard Espinoza and I'm your host. We are your Second Amendment source. We keep you up to date, whether if it's good legislation, bad legislation, or some incidents that may have happened in your state. We keep you informed and keep you up to date on what is going on that relates to your Second Amendment rights and your right to defend yourself and the right to keep and bear arms. Well, today I'm going to be talking about a disturbing incident that took place in the state of Washington in King County. Some of you may or may not know that former NFL defensive back for the Seattle Seahawks and the San Francisco 49ers, Richard Sherman, his house was robbed by home invasion robbers. Richard Sherman's wife and kids were present when these home invaders came into Richard Sherman's house and robbed him. Richard Sherman's wife and his kids are okay at this time. Just some things did get stolen. But it's no surprise that this would happen in a rabidly anti-gun state like the state of Washington. Especially the fact that they have a rabidly anti-gun governor by the name of Bob Ferguson. And if you know about Bob Ferguson was also the former Attorney General for the state of Washington. And the Second Amendment Foundation has filed a lawsuit against him during his time as Attorney General. According to Alan Gobry, the founder and president of the Second Amendment Foundation, made claims that Bob Ferguson was targeting or illegally targeting members of the Second Amendment Foundation. But whatever the case may be, Bob Ferguson does have a huge anti-gun record, and it's no surprise that criminals will do their dirty deeds in a rabidly anti-gun state. Now, I don't know what Richard Sherman's politics are. Personally, I don't care what his politics are, but what the main focus is what happened to him. Not just as a celebrity, but as a human being, as a private citizen, and as a father and a husband. His home got robbed, and it's simply not right. And this is a clear message that if this happens to Richard Sherman, this could happen to you. It also goes to show that you can have all the money you want in the world and have all the money that you have. It won't buy you your Second Amendment rights. In other words, you could be a multi-millionaire or billionaire, and if you want to use a handgun to defend yourself, they put you through this red tape in the state of Washington. Even if you had your own bodyguard service, they do all this red tape to make it difficult for you to do your job. But it all depends on who you are. Now, between Richard Sherman or a state legislator or a city councilman in the state of Washington, they have the right to have a carrying permit. But if you're not one of them, you don't get one. That's the game that these political class plays. These political elites, they are against your Second Amendment rights, but they're okay to have bodyguards to protect them. They're okay with them carrying guns, but just as long as it isn't the average law-abiding citizen. And it doesn't matter if you're rich, if you're upper, lower, or what have you. The rules don't apply to you, it only applies to them. In other words, only they can, but not you. And then that's a clear message that the state of Washington is given. We all know that Governor Bob Ferguson obviously has bodyguard services. We all know he probably may or may not have a gun in his house. Maybe he does or maybe he doesn't, I don't know. But even if he did, it's only okay for him simply because he's the governor of the state. And if you're just the average law-abiding citizen, too bad. You're not going to have one to protect yourself, because Washington is making it difficult for their residents to get a handgun. And they're using all this red tape to make it difficult. So it doesn't matter what amount of money you have. It all depends on who you are. They pick and choose who gets a handgun or who can own firearms and who cannot. And the sad thing about all this is that these gun control groups are going to use this to their advantage to push for furthermore stricter gun laws on law-abiding citizens. It will give them opportunity and leverage for them to promote even more stricter gun control laws that will violate your Second Amendment rights. We all know that groups like Every Town for Not So Gun Safety, Moms Demand Action, the Brady Campaign, the Violence Policy Center, and the Southern Poverty League, they're all going to be taking advantage of this incident with Richard Sherman to justify their means and their agenda to pass even stricter gun laws. See, this is the game that these gun control groups play. I'm going to play the devil's advocate on this one. Let's say, for argument's sake, if Richard Sherman was there and he had a handgun or a shotgun or any type of weapon that he can use to fight off these home invading robbers, and if he were to kill those bad guys, let's say if he did, or him or his wife, then how would the gun control elites think? In this case, Richard Sherman and his wife would no longer be the victim. They will now be the bad guy because simply because they used a firearm to defend himself. So the bad guy becomes the victim, and the law-abiding citizen becomes the bad guy simply because they use a gun to protect themselves. And the gun control groups are not shy to admit that they don't like anybody using a firearm to protect themselves. They much rather you get robbed, get shot, take it up the rear end, and be the plain victim. And the reason why is because if you use a firearm to protect yourself against your family, against your loved ones, or even your own home, it defeats their purpose and it defeats their agenda. So in other words, if you were using a firearm to protect your home and they want to pass legislation to make it difficult for you to own their firearm, it's going to make them look bad because they can no longer justify their means to their agenda because somebody used a firearm successfully to defend their home. Now, for instance, Shannon Watts, who was the former director of Moms Demand Action, and she's no longer at the helm from what I understand, she actually thinks that women should not use a gun to protect themselves against a rapist. She says just simply get raped, it's not going to last long, and get it over with. She actually said that. She actually made those accusations. They're her own words. She actually said that it's better to be a woman to be raped than using a firearm to protect themselves. That is how anti-self-defense these gun control groups are. They don't want you to defend yourself. Because if you defend yourself, they can no longer use their agenda to push for stricter gun laws. And the more you use a firearm to defend yourself, the more they're going to lose when they try to push for legislation that will affect your gun rights. You see, these gun control groups want you to believe that stricter gun laws is about safety and making a safer society, when the reality is that they using this as a means of control. They feel that legislators have a right to tell you what you can own and what you cannot. In other words, they believe that people have a right to run your life when they can't even run the country. Now, I don't know if Richard Sherman is pro-gun or anti-gun, but what I will say is this: if Richard Sherman is smart enough, and if any of these gun control groups use his tragedy as a means to politicize their agenda to push for stricter gun laws, then Richard Sherman should step in and say, hey, had I had a firearm and if I was there, I could have stopped these bad guys. Question is, could have Richard Sherman successfully defended his home if he had a firearm or if his wife did? Well, let's just say they would have a better chance of fighting off the bad guys and stopping them, and to hold them until the authorities show up. True, they may be outnumbered, but if you know how to use your firearm properly, you can take them out. It all starts with training, knowledge, and know how to use a firearm. But it goes to show you that if you live in a restrictive blue state where they have restrictive gun laws, no matter how much money you have, they make it difficult for you to get a firearm, and they make it difficult for you to get bodyguard service even if you're wealthy. But it all depends on who you are. If you're like an NFL star or a rock star, they don't care unless if you donate money to their campaign, then they might give you a pass maybe if you're lucky. But if you're a state legislator or a state senator or a U.S. senator or a congressperson, man or woman, they give special privileges to them simply because they're part of the political elite. So they're allowed to have bodyguard service and you're not. That's the game that the state of Washington is playing. And that's exactly what the message is that Governor Bob Ferguson is doing. Now, at this time, Governor Ferguson has not passed or announced of doing any further type of legislation. I mean, Washington already has strict gun laws as it is, so what more can he do? Already, the gun groups such as Gun Owners of America, Second Amendment Foundation, and the Firearms Policy Center, they're all working together to fight against Governor Ferguson's unconstitutional strict gun laws. And also, I believe the National Association for Gun Rights is getting involved, as well as the NRA. I feel that with the leadership of Doug Hamlin, I think the NRA will do a better job fighting against this nonsense that Governor Ferguson is trying to push on the people of Washington. You see, the problem with these politicians is that they're clueless. They think somehow, some way, restricting gun laws is going to make you safe, when in reality, it only encourages crime. Don't think for one moment that these criminals do not keep up with the states that have restrictive and unrestricted gun laws. They keep up, and they always will target states that have the weakest gun laws as far as restrictive goes. In other words, making you weak to the point that you cannot use a gun because of strict laws. Criminals keep up with that. And that's why Richard Sherman was able to get robbed, because chances are when they rob a house in the state of Washington, there's that chance that that person could be unarmed. And then they get taken advantage of because of the strict laws that Washington has on their magazines and on the AR-15s and what have you. They have restrictive gun laws, and they're making it difficult for people in the state of Washington to be gun owners. Now, the gun control groups will make this argument, well, if we shut down all the gun factories in America, we wouldn't have this problem. We wouldn't have any gun violence. Well, first of all, number one, there's no such thing as gun violence. There's only human violence. It's humans who are violence. It's funny, we don't call it car violence when somebody drives erratically and runs somebody over. We don't call it alcohol violence when somebody drinks and drives. We don't call it baseball bat violence when somebody beats the snot out of somebody with a baseball bat. So why do we call it gun violence? Because there's other weapons besides guns that criminals could use. So it's basically human violence, not gun violence. Guns are not violent, people are. But you can never get that through a head to somebody that has ignorance towards the Second Amendment, especially corrupt politicians. Now, for all I know, that these thugs that ransacked Richard Sherman's home, it is possible that they could have a criminal record. They could have done this to somebody before, I do not know, but it wouldn't surprise me, because you have a lot of these corrupt district attorneys and these corrupt judges who are giving slap on the wrist to criminals and allowing them back on the street. And if these thugs have been arrested before, more than likely, a corrupt district attorney and a corrupt judge gave them a slap on the wrist so that they can repeat the same crime again. And don't think for one moment that doesn't happen. Look no further than George Gascon during the time when he was district attorney of Los Angeles and he ended up getting voted out. And same thing with Chase Goodine in San Francisco. He was recalled because he kept on being soft on crime. And these politicians use these terms, ghost guns. They blame ghost guns for these crimes. And that term came up with from my former state of California State Senator Kevin De Leon, who made up that term. He's saying that these homemade guns are not registered. They have no serial numbers. Well, he's 100% dead wrong on that. First of all, number one, I own a homemade AR-15 that I built from scratch. The lower receiver always has a serial number, so it's traceable. And as much as I hate to say it and hate to admit it, the ATF probably has it in their database right now. And I had to wait 10 days just to get a lower receiver. And the gun cannot be used for a crime unless the full trigger mechanism was put together, but it was just a stripped lower receiver made by JD Machine, which is no longer in business. They made custom AR-15 lower receivers and uppers in San Diego, but they're no longer in business. Or the Polymer 80, they have serial numbers. The ones that don't are people who are making bootleg guns that are from the black market. And one of the things that the gun control groups, as well as these legislators, the political class, they ignore the black market industry. They ignore the fact that there are criminals who make guns in their garages and they sell them out on the street for a cheap price. Do you honestly think that a criminal is going to go to a gun store and pay $800 for a Glock or $1,200 for a high-priced 1911, or pay $900 and some dollars for a high-expensive revolver, or perhaps pay even $1,200 for an expensive Colt Python? I don't think so. Criminals don't want to pay that kind of money. They want to buy cheap guns so that they can commit crimes. And even if they did buy it or try to buy it at a gun shop, their criminal records on the database, so they buy it under the table. The point is that no matter what gun law you pass, criminals are still going to get guns. The only thing that restrictive gun laws does is deny law-abiding citizens their right to defend themselves. And that's something that Governor Bob Ferguson does not get through to his head. So to all the people from the state of Washington, if you believe in the Second Amendment like I do, and you are concerned that this could happen to you, you too could be the next victim if something is not done. You too just might be the next victim of a home invasion robbery if Washington keeps on pushing for further restrictive gun rights. If they put restrictive gun laws in the books and it's going to deny you to protect your home and your family, then you got to make your voice heard. You need to call your state legislators. You need to call your congressman, your U.S. senator, and tell them that restrictive gun laws is not doing anything to protect my family, but only weakening my chances of protecting my family. It's denying my right to protect my home and my family. So I also encourage people from the state of Washington or even around the United States, we need to give Washington Governor Bob Ferguson a piece of their mind. Everybody should give a piece of their mind to Governor Ferguson and let him know how wrong he is. And I have Governor Ferguson's number. It is a legit number. I got it off his Facebook page, and I did call the number. It leads to a voicemail. So what you can do is fill up his voicemail and tell him that enough is enough, that you need to stop passing anti-gun laws and allow law-abiding citizens to protect their homes. Because if this can happen to Richard Sherman, it can well happen to anybody else. So you can contact Governor Bob Ferguson at 360-902-411. That is 360-902-411. Make sure you let Governor Ferguson know where you stand, and let him know that if he continues to support unlawful, unconstitutional, restrictive gun rights or gun laws that will violate your gun rights, you will vote him out in the next election. You got to let him know where you stand. Now, chances are he might get reelected or he might not. But Washington, being the liberal state that it is, there is that good chance. But what matters is your voice being heard. I also encourage you to call Pam Bondi's office, call Kash Patel, call whoever, and tell them that your Second Amendment rights are being denied in the state of Washington and something needs to be done. Remember, you can make a difference. Well, that is it for today for YO28 Arsenal Roundup News. If you have any type of restrictive gun laws in your state that you want to address, or any legislation that you feel that would benefit your Second Amendment rights, and you want it to be known, feel free to send me an email at RJ Espinoza, that's ESPINOZA, roundupnews@gmail.com. Tell me what state you're from. Tell me about the legislation. Tell me whether it will affect your gun rights or benefit your gun rights. Give me some details about this legislation, and I will be sure to, on my next podcast, I will address this bill to keep everybody informed. Remember, we're all in it together. Remember, united we stand, or divided we fall. Either we hang together or we hang separately. But until then, be armed, be vigilant, protect your home, protect your family, protect your loved ones, and protect your community, because the Second Amendment is the right to keep and bear arms and the right to self-defense.